This video is sponsored by Aura. More on them a little later. On a cold night in March of 2012, police in Caledonia County, Vermont received a frantic 911 call. It was from a man who said that he had been on his way to check on a friend and had stumbled across an incredibly unsettling scene. The caller explained that he was about a half mile from his destination when he spotted an SUV parked at the side of a local road. Its lights were on and its engine was still running, but there didn't appear to be anyone in the driver's seat. As the man got closer, his stomach dropped. He recognized this particular vehicle. In fact, it belonged to the same friend that he was there to check up on. While this was concerning enough on its own, what happened next turned the man's alarm into full-blown panic. He went to peer through one of the vehicle's windows, and when he did, what he saw immediately told him that something was seriously wrong. If there's one thing that everyone knew about Melissa Jenkins, it's that she cared deeply about other people. The 33-year-old single mother was well known in her small hometown of St. Johnsbury, Vermont, where she had a reputation for going out of her way to help anyone who needed it. Melissa was born in November of 1978 and spent most of her life in the St. Johnsbury area. After graduating from Danville High School in 1996, she attended multiple post-secondary institutions before graduating with a bachelor's degree in natural science. She would use this degree to pursue her lifelong passion of teaching. In 2004, Melissa got a job at a prestigious private boarding school in the area called St. Johnsbury Academy, specifically in the science department, where she would go on to teach a number of subjects, including chemistry and physics. It didn't take long for her to become one of the most popular teachers at the school. According to numerous accounts we came across in our research, Melissa was that teacher that basically all of the students hoped they got. Even those who initially thought they had no interest in science tended to walk away with a new appreciation for these subjects, something that apparently had everything to do with the kind of person and teacher that Melissa was. One such former student, Allie Ambrose, would later fondly recall how special Melissa's classes were, and how they often included fun experiments and practical projects that helped to demonstrate the concepts that she was teaching. It wasn't just that Melissa tried to make science interesting and relatable, though. According to Allie, it was also that she really cared that her students were getting the most out of what she was trying to teach them. In an interview we came across, she said, quote, "No matter what happened, she would try her hardest to make sure that you understood what was going on. Like if you took a test and failed it, she wanted you to understand it, and she would let you do test corrections." In addition to being involved in academic life at St. Johnsbury, Melissa was also a mentor outside of the classroom. She coached girls basketball and soccer at the school, and served as a proctor in the campus's dorm rooms. It was in these roles where students really got to see a more personal side of Melissa, particularly the way in which she extended her kindness and support to anyone who was struggling. In fact, she became well known for a saying of hers, "Love those the most who need it the most." Now, based on everything I've said so far, you could be forgiven for thinking that Melissa's entire life was St. Johnsbury Academy, but that actually couldn't have been further from the truth. From the sounds of it, she just had a pretty insane work ethic all around. On top of teaching, Melissa was working on completing her Master's of Education at St. Michael's College in Colchester. She also worked several nights a week serving at a restaurant called The Creamery in nearby Danville. She had kept the job for most of her adult life and was really well liked by both the customers and her fellow staff members there. It was how many people in the local community knew her. There was one other major aspect to Melissa's life, though, one that was more important to her than anything else: her 2-year-old son, Ty. As previously mentioned, Melissa was a single mother, and she mostly raised Ty by herself. According to those that knew her, she did an amazing job. Even with the million things that Melissa had to do in a day, she always found time to spend with her son. Every spare moment was devoted to him, and all of the hard work she did was done with the goal of creating the best possible life for him. It was for all of these reasons and more that when Melissa abruptly vanished in the spring of 2012, no one could believe it, especially when her 2-year-old son was found alone in the back of her abandoned car. At around 11:30 p.m. on March 25, 2012, officers with the St. Johnsbury Police Department were alerted about a 911 call. That call had been made by a man named Randy Rathburn, who stated that he had just come across something deeply troubling. He had found an abandoned SUV at the side of a local road. He was almost positive that the vehicle belonged to his 33-year-old friend, Melissa Jenkins. Not only that, but it appeared that Melissa's 2-year-old son, Ty, was in the back of the vehicle all by himself. With Randy's instructions, police quickly made their way out to the location. The SUV, a silver Suzuki Grand Vitara, had been left on a secluded stretch of Goss Hollow Road, several miles out in the rural outskirts of the town. Upon arriving, officers were immediately struck by the eeriness of the scene. The silver SUV, which was quickly confirmed to be registered to Melissa Jenkins, was the only vehicle in the vicinity. It had been left with its lights on and its engine running. 2-year-old Ty was in the back seat of the SUV, asleep and still strapped into his car seat. Thankfully, he was physically unharmed. However, Melissa was nowhere to be found. Randy told police that he was extremely worried about the situation. He didn't think there was any way that Melissa would have simply walked off and left her son alone like this, especially in the dead of night. That wasn't the only reason he was concerned either. He said that earlier that evening, Melissa had actually phoned to tell him that she was going out to help a friend who was having car trouble. According to Randy, that call had happened roughly 3 hours ago, and he hadn't been able to reach Melissa since. In fact, that was how he had ended up stumbling across the SUV. After repeatedly calling Melissa and getting no answer, he decided to head over to her house to check on her. He found the vehicle on the way. The spot where they all were now was only about a half-mile from Melissa and Ty's home. Upon hearing all of this, police were left with a similarly bad feeling about the situation. Unfortunately, things were about to get even worse. As officers looked around a little more at the scene with their flashlights, they started to find several things that had initially been hidden in the darkness. There were boot and tire tracks not far from Melissa's SUV, as well as a black and red men's baseball cap, a single women's slip-on shoe, and a smashed-up cell phone. Based on these details, police were convinced that there had been some kind of a struggle at the secluded roadside that night. One that had likely ended with Melissa being taken against her will. Whether that was related to the mysterious phone call Randy had told them about remained to be seen. However, one thing was absolutely certain. Authorities needed to find Melissa Jenkins before it was too late.
This message is for you from the Criminal Investigation Department of Revenue Canada. The reason behind this call is to notify you that we have...
Didn't see you there. I was just listening to my voicemails, and as per usual, I've got 10 new robocalls from Canada Revenue. Looks like I owe them thousands of dollars again, and for some reason, they want me to pay them in gift cards. Seems legit, right? Yeah, I don't think so either. All jokes aside, as much as this particular scam might seem painfully obvious, criminals are using it and others like it for a reason. They work, and what's worse, not all of them are this unsophisticated. It brings up a good question, though. How are scammers getting your and my information in the first place? Unfortunately, in our increasingly digital age, information like your full name, email, home address, and even your health records are becoming easier and easier to find online. Luckily, that's where Aura, the sponsor of today's video, comes in. Aura helps protect your personal information from being sold on the dark web and by data brokers. They alert you if your data is compromised and automatically opt you out of data broker websites to help keep your information out of the wrong hands. This is more important than ever, especially with data breaches like the recent AT&T incident where over 73 million customer records were leaked on the dark web. Aura provides all-in-one protection, monitoring your credit, offering fraud alerts, and even helping you secure your online accounts with a password manager. With Aura always working in the background to help keep your information safe, you can focus on the things that matter to you, knowing you have that extra layer of security. I know I definitely value my privacy, and if you're looking to step up yours too, right now Aura is offering a free 2-week trial to Crime Zone viewers. Head over to aura.com/crimezone or check out the link below to get your free trial and start securing your personal information today. After it was determined that Melissa had likely been the victim of some kind of abduction, St. Johnsbury PD were quickly assisted by the Vermont State Police. They were brought in not only to help investigate the case, but to ramp up the search effort for the missing single mother. As the sun came up the following morning, a large section of Goss Hollow Road was blocked off by police cruisers. Ground teams and canines moved out in all directions from the place where Melissa's SUV had been found, while Vermont National Guard helicopters flew in to scour the area from above. Since Melissa's house was also relatively close to where her vehicle was found, it was searched early on as well. Unfortunately, not much of interest was discovered there. Authorities did make note of some papers that looked like they had been left out, as well as a business card for a local snow removal and towing company, but that was really it. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing appeared to have been stolen, and there were no indications that anything violent had happened inside the residence. With that, detectives began working with what few clues they did have, mostly the items from the roadside, which were sent away for testing. Of particular interest to investigators was that smashed cell phone, which was confirmed to belong to Melissa. While the device may have been broken, police knew that if they could recover the data on it, it might contain valuable information. Similarly, police started conducting interviews with everyone they could think of that was close to Melissa. They began, of course, with their one and only witness, her son, Ty. Considering the boy's age, this obviously had to be handled very delicately. The interview itself was conducted by a law enforcement expert who specialized in these kinds of conversations. What investigators learned was both heartbreaking and deeply disturbing. Ty was able to confirm that after getting out of her vehicle the previous night, Melissa had been attacked. Specifically, he said, quote, "Mommy cried," and that, quote, "a man pulled on the back of her neck." Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending on the way you look at it, this seemed to be the extent of what the young boy had witnessed. As a result, police decided to move on to other interviews. After asking around a bit, one of the first people that detectives decided to question was a man named B.J. Robertson. They wanted to speak to him because, in addition to being Melissa's ex, he was also Ty's father. BJ was a former high school basketball star from the city of Burlington. He had gone on to have a short professional career in the Premier Basketball League with the Vermont Frost Heaves, though had since retired. When detectives sat down with BJ, they asked him all of the obvious things you would expect. What his relationship with Melissa and his son were like, whether there were any problems between them, stuff like that. However, it quickly became clear that BJ had nothing to do with the case. Not only was there nothing linking him to Melissa's disappearance, he was in Burlington at the time, something that many people were able to confirm. Much to the frustration of investigators, not many other names came up when they asked Melissa's family and friends about who might have been involved in her disappearance. Melissa wasn't the kind of person who had enemies, so the thought that someone would want to harm her was just hard for many of them to wrap their heads around. As for the mysterious phone call that Randy had received about the car trouble, yeah, they said it sounded like Melissa in the sense that she definitely would have gone to help out a friend, but no one actually had any idea who could have made that call. Well, that was until police had an interesting conversation with Melissa's brother, John. Like all the other people that were close to Melissa, John initially said that he believed everything was totally fine in his sister's life prior to her sudden disappearance. He had actually seen her a few nights earlier, and nothing out of the ordinary came up when they were hanging out. However, when John was asked about Melissa's past relationships, he said that there was one guy that authorities might want to look into. It was Randy Rathburn. John explained that Melissa and Randy had dated for a little while, but then Melissa had ended up calling things off. Randy wanted the relationship to be more serious, but Melissa wasn't ready for something like that. She had a lot going on in her life between her career, her education, and raising her son, and instead just asked if they could remain friends. Detectives had already considered the possibility that Randy could somehow be involved in the case. After all, he was the one who found Melissa's SUV, he was the one who called 911, and he was the one who had given police that lead about the mysterious phone call. With this new information, a potential motive had also been added into the mix. Investigators wondered, was Randy angry with Melissa for ending their romantic relationship? When they looked further into Randy's background, detectives discovered that he had been charged with a handful of crimes. None of these were all that serious, but one in particular stood out. It was for providing false information to police. For the first time in the case so far, it felt to authorities like they might be on the verge of a breakthrough. Sadly, that feeling was about to be crushed when they received some news that everyone had been dreading. At around 1:30 p.m. on March 26, 2012, so approximately 14 hours after Melissa Jenkins had been reported missing, officers from the Vermont State Police drove into a densely forested area of Caledonia County. They were headed for a place called Pine Grove Park, located about 10 miles away from where the case had first began. By this point, the search effort was moving away from Goss Hollow Road. The area around Melissa's SUV had been explored extensively, but no additional evidence had been found. As a result, police had started to check out other locations that they thought might be of interest. Pine Grove Park came up because it was a place that many locals knew about. It was right on the Connecticut River along the border between Vermont and New Hampshire, and there were some picnic benches there as well as a boat launch. Upon arriving at the park, police made their way down to that boat launch. On their way, they noticed the hacked stump of a pine sapling. The tree looked like it had been cut down quite recently and would turn out to be a disturbing omen. In the nearby river, officers found boughs and branches which had been cut from this same tree and stacked on top of each other in the shallow water. This had clearly been done with the intention of hiding what was underneath, though it wasn't at all successful. Tangled in the mess of greenery was the nude and lifeless body of Melissa Jenkins. When the 33-year-old's remains were pulled from the frigid river by a police dive team, authorities immediately discovered that she had sustained injuries consistent with an attack. There was significant bruising to her upper torso, as well as scrapes that suggested that she had tried to defend herself during a struggle. It was also obvious that other attempts had been made to conceal Melissa's body. Her wrists and waist had been loosely bound in rope, and cinder blocks had been tied to them in a failed bid to keep the body underwater. An autopsy would later reveal that Melissa had died from strangulation. The medical examiner wasn't able to confirm or rule out sexual assault, noting that it was possible that the river had washed away valuable evidence. The last chilling detail to emerge was related to one other type of injury police noticed on Melissa's body. Specifically, a number of small circular wounds that appeared in pairs and which were all evenly spaced apart. These were determined to have been made by a stun gun. To investigators, this was a sign that whoever had done this to Melissa, they had shown up prepared to harm her that night. Understandably, the news that Melissa Jenkins had been murdered came as a gut-wrenching blow to her friends, family, and the community at large. Immediately after police released a statement announcing that her remains had been found, an outpouring of grief rippled through St. Johnsbury and the surrounding area. Feeling a collective sense of helplessness, people did the only thing they could. They gathered in the places where Melissa had spent the vast majority of her time. Vigils were held at the Creamery restaurant in Danville where she had worked for so many years, as well as at St. Johnsbury Academy. According to newspaper reports from the time, hundreds of white paper bags with candles inside them lined the street outside the school's Fuller Hall. On the outside of each one was a final message of goodbye written to the beloved teacher and mother. Many others signed memorial posters in a nearby gymnasium. All of them had one question on their mind. Who could have been responsible for such a senseless and terrible crime? In the meantime, police continued the investigation where they had left off before the awful discovery. As previously mentioned, the person at the top of their list was Randy Rathburn. Upon sitting down for their second interview with Randy, detectives asked him to go over the events of the previous night once again. They also asked him about the information they had since learned from Melissa's brother John. Randy denied having anything to do with Melissa's disappearance or murder. He also stated that he never held any sort of grudge or bad feelings towards her about the fact that their romantic relationship didn't work out. He was perfectly happy being friends with Melissa and said that if anything, they had remained very close. In fact, he claimed that's why Melissa contacted him after receiving the mysterious phone call that night about the car trouble. In his opinion, she was kind of weirded out about the whole thing and wanted someone to know where she was going. In order to back up what he was saying, Randy handed over his cell phone to police. Sure enough, it showed that he had received a call from Melissa at 8:39 p.m. on March 25th, just like he had said. He also gave police the shoes he had been wearing that night. They were not a match to the boot prints found near Melissa's SUV. Randy was cooperative with every other request made of him, and as the interview went on, detectives started to feel more and more like he was telling the truth. He really was just a concerned friend who was worried about Melissa and wanted to help in any way he could. As it happened, Randy was about to help move the case forward in a pretty significant way. Like everyone else police had spoken with, Randy initially said that he had no idea who Melissa was going to meet when she disappeared. After some thinking, though, he now remembered that she had mentioned a last name during their final phone call. The last name wasn't familiar to him, but he was pretty sure that it was Prue. While Randy might not have recognized this name, it definitely jumped out to detectives. Remember that business card that they found in Melissa's house during the search? The one for the snow removal and towing company? Well, that company was owned and run by a husband and wife in the local area named Alan and Patricia Prue. That wasn't the only reason detectives knew the Prues either. Strangely, they had a meeting with the couple the same day that Melissa's body had been found, shortly before the announcement had been made to the public. The Prues had shown up at the Vermont State Police Precinct in St. Johnsbury, saying that they wanted to report Patricia's ex-husband, who they claimed was stealing her identity, stalking her, and falsifying records in her name. Here's a bit of that interview.
Let me get some names here. I don't even know you, so I'd like to know your names if you could. So what is your name?
Patricia Prue.
What's your name?
Alan.
Same last name, Prue?
Yes.
Yeah. In the scheme of things, this is something that you can fix. So, I don't know if you guys saw the newspaper today, that girl.
He is just trying to track me down through this, and now he's come up missing. So it has to do with identity theft and credit issues.
He's missing, or just kind of avoiding being caught because of...
He's not in that county no more.
Well, that doesn't mean missing. Missing is like the girl that's on the newspaper today. She's missing.
Right.
She's gone, nobody knows where she is. That's missing.
Now, at the time, this conversation wasn't officially related to the Melissa Jenkins investigation. As you heard, the case did come up, but there wasn't any real obvious connection between the events. With that detail that Randy had provided, though, the entire context of this interview had changed. Detectives wondered, were the Prues trying to cover something up? Not only did the timing of the couple showing up at the police station now seem strange, but looking back, there were other things that stuck out about the interview. During the conversation, Alan had seemed extremely nervous and was sweating despite the fact that the room they were in was not warm. Then there was Patricia, who at one point apparently brought up out of left field that her ex-husband might also be involved in Melissa's disappearance. At this point, detectives' suspicions were definitely growing about Alan and Patricia, but they knew that they still needed a lot more. Luckily, they were about to receive a new piece of evidence, one that would finally unlock the mystery that had been at the heart of this case since the beginning. Feeling like they were now on the right track, Vermont State Police detectives began asking around for more information about Alan and Patricia Prue. They learned that the couple had met through an online dating site in 2008 and had gotten married not long after. They lived in a trailer on a property in Waterford, a town just outside of St. Johnsbury. The property was owned by Alan's mother, who also lived with them. As it turned out, the place was just a short drive from where Melissa's body had been found. This wasn't the only connection that investigators were able to confirm either. When asked about the Prues directly, several of Melissa's friends and family members said that they remembered that she had hired them the previous year to do snow removal at her house. However, she specifically hadn't called them again for the winter that had just passed. She said it was because Alan in particular gave her the creeps. Needless to say, all of this was pretty interesting to detectives. Things were about to get even more compelling, though. It started when they received word that the data had been successfully recovered from Melissa's cell phone. When investigators obtained Melissa's phone records from the night of March 25th, they confirmed everything that Randy Rathburn had been telling them all along. They were quickly able to find the call that Melissa had made to him at 8:39 p.m. Just over 10 minutes before that, the log showed that there had been another call, only this one was incoming. Police didn't recognize this number, but were sure that it was the source of the mysterious call about the car trouble. Upon looking up the number, detectives learned that it belonged to a burner phone, meaning there was no name or contract associated with it. This wasn't great, but authorities weren't out of options just yet. After obtaining the call records and the data for this phone, Vermont State Police learned that it had been first activated near a Walmart store just across the state border in Littleton, New Hampshire. Concluding that this was likely the place where the phone had been purchased, they went to the store and asked for surveillance camera footage and purchase records. What they found was as clear as day. The burner phone had been purchased by Alan and Patricia Prue. Not only was there surveillance video of the Prues purchasing the phone on the day of Melissa's murder, but Patricia had actually paid for the item with a check. Detectives reasoned that this was probably why the couple had come in to make that police report about identity theft. They realized after the fact that they had screwed up and that there was something tying them to the burner phone purchase, so they needed to come up with an explanation for why Patricia's name would be on that check. Things only continued to unravel from here. Additional cell records from the burner phone placed it in the vicinity of where Melissa's remains had been found. And thanks to statements the Prues had made while making that false police report, authorities knew of at least one other location they had traveled to on the day of the crime. A fast food restaurant located in none other than Littleton, New Hampshire. When police obtained and reviewed the surveillance footage from the restaurant's drive-thru, they made another important discovery. In the video, Alan Prue could be seen wearing the same black and red baseball cap that had been found close to Melissa's SUV. On March 27, 2012, so 2 days into the investigation, Alan and Patricia were brought in for another interview. Well, technically it was their first interview about this particular case, but you get what I mean. The pair were separated and spoken to individually. Patricia denied everything, even when presented with surveillance video of her buying the burner phone, and quickly asked for a lawyer. Alan, though, was a much different story. If you'll remember, Alan was nervous the first time he spoke to police, and that was when they weren't even really grilling him about anything. Now he was by himself, and detectives had a pretty damning case against him. He still tried to deny any wrongdoing, but pretty quickly his story didn't add up, and he started to crack.
Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm a little upset. I'm being questioned. I mean, I just don't know why.
We're trying to just firm up your timeline.
You don't have a problem doing that, do you?
Right, no.
Okay. Just tell me what you were doing.
Where the hell did we go Sunday? Half the time I don't even pay attention where I go. Damn it.
Al, look at me. You haven't been honest with us. We have a tremendous amount of evidence built up here, okay? This is a turning point. Right here, right now, Al.
I'll tell you what I'm holding back. I am scared was here. I am one of these people to spit shake somebody.
You want to spit shake right now?
Yes.
There, that's a spit shake. If you don't feel emotion rushing through your body, then you're missing this spit shake.
Now, as much evidence as authorities had at this point, you might have noticed that the question of motive was still really a mystery. Well, Alan was about to reveal all of that. And let's just say that even the seasoned detectives in the room were unprepared for what he had to say.
This is the part. We wanted a girl we could play with, but we wanted a willing.
Alan went on to explain that while he and Patricia were happily married, the two of them had a shared fantasy. They both enjoyed the idea of having a threesome with another woman. Alan and Patricia had actually done this in the past, but Alan said that none of these partners had lived up to what they wanted. They decided that the problem was that they just hadn't found anyone that they were both attracted to enough. That had changed when they had been hired for a snow removal job the previous year, and they met Melissa Jenkins. Alan claimed that he and Patricia had never meant to hurt Melissa. The whole thing had started with a plan to have a consensual relationship with her. It's just that everything had spiraled out of control. On the night of March 25th, Alan stated that he and his wife had called Melissa from the burner phone they had purchased, pretending to have car trouble close to her house. However, when Melissa showed up, something came over him. He didn't even ask about what he and Patricia had planned. Instead, as soon as Melissa got out of her SUV, he started attacking her.
We ended up going up on Goss Hollow Road. And my wife called Melissa from the track phone. Melissa come down, pulled up in front of us, and then next thing I know, I got her on the ground doing it.
Doing what?
Strangling her.
Did she put up a fight?
A little bit.
Alan said that he was able to overpower Melissa and drag her back to his and Patricia's vehicle. Once inside, he started driving while Patricia continued the brutal attack. At some point, without his knowledge, he claimed, Patricia ended up killing Melissa. At that point, they both went into a panic. In order to cover up what they had done, Alan explained that they briefly drove back to their home in Waterford. There, they removed Melissa's clothing, doused her in bleach to try and remove any fingerprints or DNA, and grabbed some other supplies including the cinder blocks and the rope. From there, they drove out to the boat launch in Pine Grove Park, tied the cinder blocks to Melissa's body, and threw her in the water. When she didn't sink, he and Patricia cut down that pine sapling and removed some branches in a last-ditch attempt to hide the remains. Before finally returning home, they drove across the state border into New Hampshire, where they burned Melissa's clothes, the boots Alan was wearing, and other evidence.
Then I headed down Route 5, went home, and I grabbed the cement blocks. The rope was already in the car, and we dragged her out on a tarp, took her clothes off. I dumped bleach on her.
Why?
Thinking I would get rid of fingerprints or whatever. I put her in the water, weighted her down with blocks, tied her feet with rope, put branches over her, and then we left and went home.
Why'd you guys kill her? No bull. Why'd you kill her?
I don't know why I did it. I have no idea. Something was wrong with me that night. I did not feel like myself that night. Melissa, if you can hear me, I'm terribly sorry. You didn't deserve that. You're a nice person. You deserve to live a long life, watch your baby grow up. I'm truly sorry. Don't do it again. Never pray that.
Despite the detailed confession and his claims that everything had been a terrible accident, detectives felt that the overall story Alan was telling didn't make any sense. If he and Patricia never meant to harm Melissa, why had they lured her out of her home late at night under false pretenses? Moreover, why had they done all that prep work, such as buying the burner phone to try and cover their tracks? To investigators, there was an obvious answer. The Prews might not have been intending to kill Melissa, at least not right away, but they had certainly been trying to kidnap her. They had decided that they were going to fulfill whatever twisted fantasies they wanted, whether Melissa was a willing participant or not. Following Alan's confession, both he and Patricia were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted kidnapping. Though the case against the couple was already fairly damning, more evidence would be compiled over the following days and weeks. During a search of the Prews' property, bleach and cinder blocks matching the ones found with Melissa's body were recovered, as well as the box to a stun gun. The area where they burned Melissa's clothing was located, where authorities were able to recover steel toe inserts and the partially melted soles of a pair of men's work boots. These apparently matched the footprints that had been found at the initial crime scene. The treads from the Prews' car likewise matched the tire tracks left at the side of Goss Hollow Road. Finally, DNA testing was done on the black and red baseball cap. It was a match to Alan Prew. Even when faced with all of this, Alan and Patricia initially both decided to try their luck at trial. Alan went first, and had a fairly simple defense. Patricia was responsible for everything. Alan and his lawyers argued that he was totally normal before Patricia came into his life. They alleged that she was the one with all the fantasies, and that she had forced Alan to take part in everything. Those who spoke in Alan's defense, including his mother, said that he had definitely changed since marrying Patricia. The mother claimed that her son used to have all sorts of hobbies, but that these had slowly fallen by the wayside after the marriage. She said that Patricia was always around, didn't work, and seemed to have a lot of control over her son. Alan's lawyers further cited his low IQ and the fact that he had never finished high school as evidence that he could be easily manipulated. Now, it's hard to tell how much of this is legitimate and how much of it was simply an attempt by Alan to avoid responsibility for his actions. What does seem to be true, though, is that Patricia was at least as much a part of the crime as Alan. We know this thanks to search history from her computer, which revealed that she was looking up some pretty disturbing stuff in the lead-up to the murder. I honestly can't even repeat some of these searches because we're on YouTube, but let's just say the list starts with, quote, "how to kidnap a girl," and just gets worse from there. There was also testimony from a jailhouse informant who was locked up with Patricia, who came forward and alleged that she had confessed to having been intimately involved in the planning and carrying out of the crime. At the end of his trial in October of 2014, Alan Prew was convicted of all of the charges against him and sentenced to life in prison. When it came time for her trial the following year, Patricia ended up taking a plea deal. She agreed to accept a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, in exchange for still being able to communicate with her husband. At the time of this recording, Alan and Patricia Prew both remain incarcerated. The hardest cases that we cover on this channel are always the ones where there's a lot of information available about the personal lives of the victims. I feel like that's maybe not that surprising. The more you know about someone, the more you're able to connect and identify with them, after all. But of course, with that connection comes a lot more emotional and psychological weight. In this case, there was a ton of information available about Melissa Jenkins, and I ended up spending hours just reading through newspaper records and other accounts. These sources painted such a vivid picture of the amazing person that Melissa was, and all of the lives that she so obviously touched. It's truly gutting to think about, not only for the profound loss of all of the people close to her, but for Melissa herself, for the things she never got to finish, the goals she never got to achieve, and perhaps most of all, the son that she never got to see grow up. The one small silver lining to this case is that it appears that there was an outpouring of generosity towards Melissa's family after all this took place. The community came together and not only raised money to help support her son, but also to ensure that she would have a lasting legacy. In addition to multiple memorial scholarships being set up in her name, Melissa was also posthumously awarded her Master's of Education. Before we wrap up, we just wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. As always, we hope you found today's story interesting and informative. A huge thanks as well to today's sponsor, Aura. Don't forget to check out the link in the description below to get your 2-week free trial. If you're looking for additional ways to support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.